This is a CBS News special report. The name of the new pope is about to be announced. I'm Harry Reasoner in New York, now to Winston Burdett at the Vatican.
The tall windows have just opened above the portico of St. Peter's Basilica for the announcement and the presentation of the new head of the Roman Catholic Church, who was elected just a little over 40 minutes ago. The man who will make the announcement is Cardinal Pericle Felice, to whom this honor falls in virtue of his rank as head of the order of Cardinal Deacons. Cardinal Felice, his announcement will be brief, and it will be in Latin, the language of the Church.
Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum.
I announce glad news. And next will come the words, Habemus Papam, we have a Pope.
Habemus Papam. Eminentissimum ac reverendissimum Dominum Karolum Sancte Romane Ecclesiae Cardinalem Wojtyła. Qui sibi nomen imposuit Ioannis Pauli.
The new Pope is Karol Wojtyła, who is Polish and is 58 years old. A Polish Archbishop, Cardinal Karol Wojtyła, who has taken the name as Pope of Pope John Paul II. This is the first time in more than 4.5 centuries that a non-Italian has been elected Pope. The new Pope will now appear to accept the acclamations of the crowd, to greet the world, and to bestow his first benediction. He is Polish, the Archbishop of Krakow. An extraordinary turning point in the history of the Church and in the story of the papacy. Italians have been popes since the year 1523, when a Dutchman ruled for a fairly short pontificate of some 20 months. For the first time in so many centuries, the conclave of cardinals has gone outside of Italy to elect a new head of the Roman Catholic Church. The bells of St. Peter's and of all of Rome will now toll for 10 minutes. The balcony, high up on the facade of St. Peter's Basilica, is made ready for his appearance. St. Peter's has gathered a huge cosmopolitan crowd, the devout and the curious, not only from Rome, not only from all of Italy, but from many other countries.
Winston?
To witness what is certainly one of the greatest of Rome's public spectacles, the presentation of a new pope.
Winston, this is Harry Reasoner in New York. Do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Was there any mention of this cardinal in the pre-conclave speculation?
None whatever. It's a total surprise. I'll say that if you wish. May I? Before this conclave of cardinals began, many Italians were mentioned as possible candidates, some non-Italian Europeans, some cardinals even from beyond the seas, from Latin America. But the name of Cardinal Karol Wojtyła was never mentioned. It never appeared in the press of Italy or in the minds of Vatican observers. The choice of this cardinal comes as a total surprise.
I imagine a lot of people are going to the reference books on Roman Catholic cardinals right now to find out about Pope John Paul II. He's not only non-Italian, he's very young, 58.
He is only 58 years old, which means that the Church, the cardinals, have chosen a man who, thanks to his age, gives promise of many years of active and energetic leadership. He is the son of a working man, and he himself, as a young man, worked in a chemical factory in Krakow while he was attending secondary school and university. And even as a young man, we are told, he dedicated himself to the religious and cultural improvement, well-being of workers, and for that purpose he himself established a recreational center within the factory itself where he worked. Afterwards, he entered a major seminary at Krakow and studied philosophy and theology, and then, still later, following his ordination, he came to Rome to take higher courses in philosophy at the Pontifical Athenaeum Angelicum, where he earned his doctorate in philosophy back in 1948.
Winston, I assume this choice would be interpreted as a gesture of conciliation toward Eastern Europe and toward the communist countries. Poland is the communist country where the Church gets along best, and it must be interpreted as a kind of a compliment to the Poles.
It certainly, I should say, it is a compliment to the Polish Catholics and to the Catholic Church in Poland. As we know, the Catholic Church in Poland is so great a national force, and Catholicism itself is such a fervent force that it is one that the Polish regime has had over the years to come to terms with in order to achieve national unity. And so that it is a tribute certainly to this achievement of the Polish Catholic Church. And this acknowledgement, if you will, of the coexistence which the Polish Catholic Church, through its own strength, has been able to achieve with the Polish communist regime.
Will this, as well as the first non-Italian Pope in a long time, will this be the first non-Italian speaking Pope? Do you happen to know if he does speak Italian?
I do not know whether he speaks Italian, but certainly he must speak some. He must be able to handle Italian because he has studied here in Rome, and he has taken courses both in the Italian and the Latin languages, and therefore he must be thoroughly familiar with Italian. I should not think that that would present a difficulty. After his studies here in Rome, he went back to Poland and did pastoral work, although with great difficulties and under great restrictions as the parish assistant in several parishes of the Archdiocese of Krakow. That was during the years of the Cold War.
Winston, with me in New York, his father, Richard McBrien, professor of theology at Boston College, who has been with us through these two popes in the last couple of months. Father, do we know anything about the new pope?
Well, not a great deal. I mean, there are reports on him like there were reports on all the cardinals. He does fit the mold in this sense. Obviously, he's broken the mold in terms of the national background, but he does fit the mold in this sense. He is socially progressive and theologically conservative. That was Paul VI mold. It was Pope John Paul I mold, and he's a pastoral bishop. So the only aspect of the formula they broke with this time was the national origin of the candidate. But he's a bishop of a diocese, not a curial man. He is socially progressive. He's identified with the plight of the poor. He's been an outspoken defender of the rights of workers in Poland. He has not been as hardline as Cardinal Wyszynski in Poland, although diplomatically he was very careful not to publicly separate himself from Cardinal Wyszynski. He took a very liberal and progressive stand at some of the synods of bishops. He was one of the more liberal bishops at the Second Vatican Council in a relative sense. So I think what we have here in the new Pope, in John Paul I, and the fact that he took that name is significant. I think we have a Pope that fits the formula that we saw worked out in August, with the grand exception that it's a non-Italian.
And you foresaw that they might have to go to that exception just simply because of the developing rivalries among the Italians. So.
Yeah, I think one of the most significant things about this, not theologically significant, but something that the press and other observers will want to chew over for a while, is why is it that the cardinals, ignored the obvious candidacies of other pastoral bishops from the ranks of the Italian cardinals? It's an interesting item to speculate about, and I certainly don't know the answer. I mean, there are other cardinals like Ursi or Pappalardo or Poma or Ugo Poletti, the people that were named in the original speculation. And they went outside of Italy and took a younger man, a vigorous man, and maybe this is their way of saying that, finally making the statement that the church is more than a church bound to narrow traditions, that the world is broader than the free world, so to speak, that the church has to face problems as it does in Eastern Europe. And here's a man who obviously has been very successful at doing it. He's been forthright as a Catholic leader, and yet he's not been so recalcitrant and hardline as to break off dialogue with the communist leaders. In fact, this is really a vote of confidence in the foreign policy of Pope Paul VI, with his famous Ostpolitik, his famous opening to dialogue with the communist regimes of the East. It seems to me, a very strong affirmation of it. And if I may say this too, it probably reflects, I could be wrong about it, but I don't think that Cardinal Benelli was completely out of the picture, because Benelli himself was very much the architect. It's certainly the executor of that policy, and I'm sure that Cardinal Wojtyła would have been a person that he could rely upon to carry out that policy without bucking it and without making it difficult for the Vatican.
It's that kind of a thing in foreign policy, but in terms of the issues that divide Catholics these days, would they be less? They'd be less issues in Poland, wouldn't they, than they are in the United States?
That's right. The Polish Catholic Church tends to be a more traditional church in terms of practices. I don't think the issue of ordination of women, for example, or clerical celibacy, or the issue of birth control would be quite so pronounced in the Polish Church as it would be in other churches of Europe and the United States. And that's why I think one must emphasize the fact, even though the media will obviously take a great deal of interest in the fact that he's a non-Italian, that doesn't mean he's suddenly going to break the mold. He's a non-Italian pope who will pretty well follow in the tradition of Paul VI and John Paul I on issues regarding the internal operations of the church. I would not expect this new pope to take any bold initiatives in terms of some of those internal issues I've mentioned. Where this new pope is going to be very progressive is on the foreign policy of the church, the dialogue with the communists, the third world. I think he'll be very progressive on the issue of social justice. I'm sure he got the support of the third world cardinals from Latin America and Asia and Africa precisely because he is so strong on this. But so I think we're probably going to have another pontificate much like the pontificate of Paul VI, except we have a younger man and a man who is tested in a different way from Paul VI, and a more pastoral man perhaps too.
Well, we're waiting for our first look at him. Winston, how long is it apt to be before the Pope appears?
Well, what is happening now, that's to say between the moment when he was elected, which is now nearly an hour ago, and his appearance, various things happen. The newly elected cardinal, the new pope, must of course change into his papal vestments. And then each of the cardinals, each of the 110 cardinals who took part in the conclave, pay their first obeisance to him. That's to say, their first act of formal acknowledgement of him as their pope, each of them in turn kneeling before him and exchanging an embrace. And then there are other matters of etiquette and formality, and the procession must form up. The cardinal electors in procession will proceed into the large hall which runs the entire width of the facade of St. Peter's Basilica, and they will appear at the windows, forming a kind of guard of honor for the man whom they have just elected. And that will probably take a few moments more. But the crowd's expectation is so high that it is also very patient in anticipation of seeing it.
It looks as if the square had filled up since the white smoke.
The election, as you already know, came on what was probably the 7th ballot, meaning that the cardinals had been unable to reach a consensus on an Italian candidate. The required majority was 2/3 plus 1, that's to say 75 cardinals of the 111 voting.
Some people had the impression that this was going to be a long conclave simply because they didn't choose a pope on the first day, but actually it's still pretty expeditious, 7 ballots.
7 ballots is not, of course, a long conclave. This conclave, the conclave that elected Pope John Paul I was, of course, far more rapid than anyone expected. This one was a little longer than some expected, but not very much. 7 ballots is not long as papal conclaves go.
It took 11 ballots, Harry, to elect Pope John XXIII. So,
exactly.
And do 7 ballots to go to a non-Italian, break that kind of precedent, it's almost hasty.
So Pope Paul VI, who went into the conclave as the leading candidate, he still required 6 ballots to win. So this, I think this is extraordinary. That it's a non-Italian is extraordinary, first of all, but that it was so relatively quick an election for such a precedent-shattering decision.
The new Pope, Father McBrien, I understand, has taken, as one would expect, a very strong stand on the subject of religious liberty for all and everywhere, and also on the question of collegiality, of episcopal collegiality. That's to say, he would be in favor of giving a larger voice, more genuine participation to the bishops of the world and around the world in the central government, in the decision-making of the central government of the Church.
Yes, and if it weren't for that fact, of course, he would not have had the support that he needed from the progressive cardinals, for whom that is a major consideration. But Cardinal Wojtyła has an excellent record in that regard, both at the Second Vatican Council and at one or two of the the international synods since then. So that I'm sure that that put him very high in their estimation. And also his experience with the communist regime probably reassured the more conservative cardinals that he was not naive about the nature and operations of a Marxist regime, even though he had success in dealing with it. So there are qualities in the man, as there were in Cardinal Luciani, that I could see would commend him to both sides and make him a compromise candidate. But then you still have to deal with that real extraordinary dimension of this choice, namely that he is a non-Italian. And again, the question comes up, how is it that they passed over several of the Italian candidates who might also have fit that same bill, that same profile as a socially progressive but theologically conservative candidate?
Wouldn't the speculation be there that a certain amount of, not animosity, but rivalry within the college had developed to the point where it was easier to go outside?
That's a possibility. And another possibility, Harry, is that, if I may put it somewhat prosaically, Pope John Paul I was a tough act to follow. And perhaps they felt they had to make a real imaginative gesture to, in a sense, hold the world's attention. I don't mean that now in a cynical sense, but really to keep the papacy as a very credible and important influence in the world. And by suddenly going outside the Italian ranks, making a point with italics that the papacy is a religious office that's for the whole world, not just for the Catholic Church, and certainly not just for the free world. It's not simply an instrument of democratic governments, that Catholicism and indeed religious communities must live in all parts of the world under all kinds of regimes. And here's a man who's been successful at it. He's obviously successful.
We should note, while we're waiting for the Pope to appear, that the pictures today are being provided by RAI, the Italian television network.
I think another dramatic fact, Father McBrien, to point out historically as we look back over the past few generations, the Roman Curia, the papacy, the College of Cardinals itself, these have been Italian creations of Italian statecraft. And only a few generations ago, the Italians, of course, were dominant in the College of Cardinals. And it was, in effect, the Italians who elected the Pope. The Church has changed, and how enormously it has changed, and has become conscious of itself as a worldwide institution, is illustrated by this extraordinary leap across the frontiers of Italy to find the new Pope. And the new Pope, as you said, he will be coming as a Pole, as a foreigner, to become the master, the chief executive of what is still, after all, a largely Italian institution in its imprint. And I think one can expect him, not to turn things upside down or anything of that sort, but rather to act with great tact. He comes into a delicate situation as the first non-Italian to enter this world of Rome and of Italy, the first non-Italian to do so, as we said earlier, in 455 years.
Apart from the age and the nationality, there's also one other difference between this nominee and his predecessor, and that is he also has academic experience, as Pope John Paul I did, but it is not confined to the seminary. Pope John Paul II had a university position. He has a doctorate in philosophy and in theology. And for some people that may seem like just a subtle difference. I mean, academics are academics, and yet a university environment is considerably different from seminary, and I've taught in both. And I think that's a good sign. This man knows what it is to teach in a university environment, and he is forced really to come to terms with the findings and the objections, if you will, of quite a broad variety of disciplines. It's not an environment like a seminary where all of your courses is focused in theology and philosophy. So there are certain things, at least on paper, that commend this choice very highly, but it would be disingenuous of myself and I think many others to talk as if we're quite familiar with this candidate and we know exactly what this means in terms of the future of the church.
He was
Father McBrien.
Yes.
Well, with me here watching the scene is Father Robert Wister, and I'd like to ask him his impressions of this dramatic turn.
I think one of the ironies of it is that just about 10 years ago, during the celebration of the millennium of Polish Christianity, Pope Paul VI wanted to visit Poland, but he wasn't allowed to. And now a Polish cardinal has come to Rome and has been elected Pope, and it'll be interesting to see what will happen should he desire to visit his homeland, which is one of the most vibrant churches in the Roman Catholic Church. The Polish Church is very much alive, strong, and growing.
I'm sure national pride will be very strong, Bob, on that. I think they'll be delighted. I think you'll find the communist officials right out there in the front of the line. They'll be so proud of this election, and justifiably so.
Yes, I think the Poles are Polish before they're communist, and
Yes.
In many cases Catholic before they're communist.
Very definitely. Now, the Polish Church is one of the strongest churches in the entire Catholic world.
And the Polish Americans, too, have always been known as very strong Catholics.
Yes, indeed.
Well, from all the reports we hear, of course, that we get here in Rome, the attendance at Catholic churches in Poland is spectacular, and would be spectacular in our own eyes.
Well, in many countries of the world, there has been a great decline in the number of priests and sisters. In Poland, it's the opposite, to the point that, if we can use the word, they're exporting sisters and priests to countries that have experienced a lack of priestly and sisters' vocation.
Of course, Father Wister, that could come up as a problem for the new Pope if the pressure continues, as it inevitably must in the Roman Catholic Church in Europe and in the United States, for changes in certain areas of the Church's life. It's possible that the new Pope, not having experienced these crises in his own homeland, might not be quite so responsive to the pressure. Now, for some people, that's good, that he won't be responsive, but for others, there could be a moment's frustration that, although socially progressive, he seems to be quite strong in holding the line, you might say, in terms of doctrine and discipline. So we have to wait. Just as we had to wait to see what Pope John Paul I would have done, we have to wait and see what Pope John Paul II can do over the course of several months. It'll take 6 to 9 months before the lines of his papacy even become apparent.
This dramatic summer has not solved any of the issues he'll have to face.
As I said before, on August 6th, when Pope Paul VI died, the Catholic Church was beset by many, many problems, internal as well as external. They have not gone away. We had a very brief and very delightful respite with the 34 days of John Paul I. But this man, a younger man, really faces a challenge, a very great challenge. Number one, to hold the attention and the warmth of the world, while at the same time leading the Church on a course that he and others deem appropriate, without further dividing it. And it's a very difficult task, and no one knew that more than the late Pope Paul VI, who literally agonized over that problem of trying to lead the Church down a middle course, and tragically, in some instances at least, he ended up pleasing neither side. And this is going to be a very difficult challenge, but he's a younger man, he's a man with different kind of experience, and he may have a different sort of freedom.
If, as you noted, his university experience has probably given him a more cosmopolitan understanding of some of these issues than a pastoral cardinal would have had.
Well, he has both. Of course, that's the wonderful thing. He's been a Archbishop of Krakow for quite some time, and as well as having a university appointment earlier on. So he does have both. He has the academic and the pastoral. But significantly, he doesn't have the bureaucratic. He doesn't have the any curial experience, and they have stuck with that part of the formula.
Well, he'll come as a stranger to the machinery of the Roman Curia and of the church administration, just as Pope John Paul I did. But obviously the conclave was ready to take that chance.
Well, we may find, Winston, that he may be a stronger person. I don't mean just...
I beg your pardon?
I think the new pope may be a stronger person, not just in terms of his health, but a stronger person in terms of his convictions, in terms of determination than the previous pope. The previous pope was a very gentle man, and maybe in the end his gentleness broke him under the pressure. We just don't know, but it'll be interesting to pick up his style the first few weeks. And you can tell a lot about a person in those first few days and weeks. And we may find that he's a stronger person, a more determined person, and can bear the pressures that commended him to the more progressive cardinals. You've got to keep in mind, as was pointed out earlier, it requires 2/3 plus 1 to elect a pope. And that means no one can be elected who is anathema or who is very much hostile to either the conservative or liberal wing. And so he's got to have something that commended him to both. And the conservatives were looking for a strong leader. And the liberals, or the more progressive cardinals, were looking for one who, in his strength, would nonetheless share his authority, consult widely, and be open to change and adaptation where appropriate. And I think
he must have a strong personality, I think.
Well, I would agree, Bob. I really do think he must have a very strong personality to have attracted that kind of support so fast. And a lot of our listeners are going to wonder, what do you mean fast? We had the other pope elected the first day, but keep in mind, this is one of the shortest conclaves in this century, and the great Pope John the 23rd required 3 days, 11 ballots. So
it's one of the most dramatic breaks with the past.
Yes, I mean, to get a non-Italian pope, you'd expect would have come after the 5th day. But
yes, exactly.
This is an extraordinary decision.
He must have a personality that impresses the cardinals, because he was,
undoubtedly,
when they were mentioning non-Italian possibilities, he was not on the list.
No, he was
from
not.
Outside. So in effect, they must have known him in the previous conclave, and nobody talked about him.
He's always been in the shadow of Cardinal Wyszynski, the primate of Poland.
Yes.
Who was a very strong and powerful personality. Besides being Archbishop of the capital city, Warsaw, he was the primate of the nation, and ex officio he was the head of the Bishops' Conference of Poland. So Cardinal Wojtyła, now Pope John Paul II, was always a bit in his shadow. So his personality must have been strong enough to bring him out of that shadow to his fellow cardinal electors.
Well, I can recall when we were sitting here in New York back in August, when Pope John Paul I came out on the balcony, that Harry Reasoner and I noted immediately in the man's smile that this was a different sort of person. And our first impressions, I think, Harry, it's fair to say, were accurate. There was a warmth, and we can't necessarily conclude every time that the first few minutes are going to tell us all that much, but we'll tell a lot about the man just in the few moments he spends with us from the balcony and responding to the crowd, and we'll tell a lot about him in the way he responds to the crowds at the first audiences and so forth. I
remember with John Paul I, when he came out, you got the very strong impression that there was a man who was going to enjoy being Pope.
Yes.
And was confident about it.
Yes.
That's right. And he had broad shoulders and a strong hand. And a lot of warmth. He had it all together from the very first moment, just as you say.
And we should should not ignore the fact that the selection of a name, and this has been true from the very beginning, the selection of a name is a new pope's first policy statement. That in itself is a policy statement. Now, occasionally popes have selected names of popes that, in a sense, brought them along. It was an act of filial piety. But in most cases, the selection of a name indicates a direction. And the very fact that Pope John Paul I selected the two names showed that he wanted to be as friendly and as open and as warm as John the 23rd, but to be as prudent and as careful and responsible as Paul VI. And what the new Pope is saying is that he wants to carry on in the same tradition.
As communicative, as warmly communicative as Pope John Paul I was.
That's right.
And that's an interesting point that Harry raised earlier about the language that he will speak. What language will he speak now as the Bishop of Rome, who comes every Sunday to his window to address the crowds here in St. Peter's Square, and who every Wednesday holds public audiences? In what language will he speak?
Well,
he will speak, I'm sure, Italian,
yes,
with a Polish accent, and everyone would love it.
Yes, I think you're right, Winston.
I think that's what it will be.
Yes, and I think that's appropriate. He is the Bishop of Rome, and even though the Pope has a vicar, in this case Cardinal Ugo Poletti, his office as the head of the Roman Catholic Church is derived from his position as Bishop of the Diocese of Rome.
He's Bishop of an Italian city.
That's right.
Yeah. And the Romans have a great sense of possessiveness. The cardinals appear at the windows. 110 cardinals.
The crowd is
newly elected Pope makes the 111th. We have a Pope, the Cardinal Felice announced. Those are words which contain in them great joy, but also great pride, a sense of creating a new figure for the age-old office. There are the representatives of all three branches of the Italian armed forces to render military honors: Army, Navy, Air Force.
We should not ignore the fact, and I don't know why I didn't mention it earlier, Winston, that the Italian Church, of course, has its own challenge in dealing with the very strong presence of communism in Italy, and again, they've turned to a man who has a track record of success. This probably was another major consideration, because many have said they'd never pick a non-Italian because of the peculiar political situation in Italy, but on the other hand, here's a man who has dealt with an even more serious situation where communism was not only a major force, but was in fact the government. And that's a consideration, I'm sure, that was in their minds.
That's a mighty consideration, a very interesting one. And it's occurred to me, that a non-Italian might deal with the Italian political situation in an even more detached and stronger way, a clearer way than an Italian himself might, an Italian being so involved.
We're about to get our first impression now.
Pope Paul John II. Until today, the Polish Cardinal, the Archbishop of Krakow, Karol Wojtyła. The crowd is happy, and I think you can be sure that Italians generally are.
Cardinal Wyszynski, the other Polish cardinal, is on the left of the screen.
Yes, so he is.
Sia lodato Gesù Cristo.
Sempre sia lodato.
He speaks in Italian.
Carissimi fratelli e sorelle, siamo ancora tutti addolorati dopo la morte dell'amatissimo Papa Giovanni Paolo I.
We have all been in profound sorrow after the death of the most beloved Pope John Paul I.
Ed ecco, gli eminentissimi cardinali hanno chiamato un nuovo vescovo di Roma.
And the cardinals have called for a new bishop of Rome.
Lo hanno chiamato di un paese lontano.
They have called me from a distant country.
Lontano ma sempre così vicino per la comunione nella fede e nella tradizione cristiana.
Distant but ever close in the communion of the faith and the Christian tradition.
Io ho avuto paura di ricevere questa nomina, ma
With fear I have received this nomination.
ma ho fatto nel spirito dell'ubbidienza verso il nostro Signore e nella fiducia totale alla sua madre, Madonna Santissima.
But I have answered in obedience to our Lord and to the Mother of God.
Anche non so se potrei bene spiegarmi nella la nostra lingua italiana. Se mi sbaglio,
I speak to you in our Italian language.
se mi sbaglio mi corrigerete.
If I make mistakes, you will give me advice.
E così mi presento a voi tutti per confessare la nostra fede comune,
And so I
la
present
nostra
myself to you all
speranza,
to confess our
la
common
nostra
faith,
fiducia
our hope,
alla Madre di Cristo e della Chiesa
our confidence
e anche
in the Mother of the Church, and also
a incominciare da nuovo su quella strada, della storia e della Chiesa, di incominciare con aiuto di Dio e con
and to set forth
aiuto
on this road of the
dei
Church
uomini.
with the aid of God and with the aid of men. His Italian is clear, direct, concise, forceful.
Sancti Apostoli Petrus et Paulus, de quorum potestate et auctoritate confidimus, ipsi intercedant pro nobis ad Domino. Precibus et meritis, Beate Mariae semper Virginis, Beati Michaelis Arcangeli, Beati Ioannis Baptiste, et Sanctorum Apostolorum Petri et Pauli, et omnium Sanctorum, misereatur vestri omnipotens Deus, et dimissis peccatis vestris perducat vos, Iesus Christus ad vitam aeternam. Indulgentiam, absolutionem et remissionem omnium peccatorum vestrorum, spatium vere et fructuose penitentiae, cor semper penitens, et emendationem vitae, gratiam et consolationem Sancti Spiritus, et finalem perseverantiam in bonis operibus, tribuat vobis omnipotens et misericors.
Cardinal Karol Wojtyła, Archbishop of Krakow, now Pope John Paul II. The great crowd acclaims him here in this extraordinary, this splendid setting of St. Peter's, the place which is both a church and a theatre. You know, Harry, I am sure that the Italians will be generally glad to have a foreign pope, a non-Italian pope. And some friends of mine have said to me in recent days, without believing it, it's time to have a foreign pope, let's have an Indian. They didn't think that that would happen, but now it has.
Certainly, he made a good impression on that audience with his gracious admission that Italian was not his language and his invitation for the people to help him when he made mistakes.
Exactly. Exactly. Nevertheless, he spoke it very well and very clearly and very forcefully. Everyone will understand him.
And so the conclave has elected the first non-Italian pope in 4 centuries, Cardinal Karol Wojtyła, the Archbishop of Krakow in Poland. He will be known as Pope John Paul II. His installation could possibly come this Sunday. CBS News will present a special report on the new pope later tonight. I'm Harry Reisner.
This has been a CBS News special report.
This is CBS.